Okay, everyone, we are live with audio, and I'll ask you to take your seats and get ready for the last session of the day. Congratulations, you made it. It's been a long one. But I have been informed to let you know that the happy hour, which I'm sure everyone is looking forward to, will be taking place here at the Grapponi Center and not at O's. So if you'd like to stay and enjoy each other's company for little bit longer, you're welcome to join us for that a happy hour here at the Grapponi Center. So with that, I will get us started. This session is related to storage and opportunities for that here in the Granite State, as well as what we might learn from other places that are more advanced in adopting storage than here in Little New Hampshire. We'll take a look at how storage is developed and used across the country and here in New Hampshire, and we'll take a look into important considerations for us to think about as we lay the foundation of storage policy in the Granite State. We'll also learn more about what opportunities already exist here. Some of our panelists work for utilities, and there are some storage offerings for both residential and more utility scale storage here. So we'll take a look into that. And as your moderator for today, I'll start with a brief anecdote about how we're just starting on our storage policy thoughts here in New Hampshire. Clean Energy New Hampshire is involved in a docket at the PUC, and that is an investigation into storage, and that's docket 2166. And some of the things they're looking at are avoided transmission and distribution costs, as well as accurate and efficient price signals, which might include time of use rates, or things like opportunities to expand bring your own device programs that are already existing or to bring them to new areas of the state, as well as utility compensation, such as perhaps performance-based rate making or other solutions, and whether we have private entities owning storage or more utility-owned storage, and much, much more. This investigation has hit a bit of a stall due to some complications with legislation and whether the study should take place with the Department of Energy, which is newly formed, or whether it should remain at the PUC. So we're waiting for an answer from the Attorney General's office on that. But meanwhile, it gives us some time to learn some more about storage and to think about the way that we move forward in a really thoughtful way. So to do that, we have 4 experts here today that I'm sure you'll enjoy hearing from, and each of them is going to give a brief presentation, and we'll have an opportunity for question and answers. So I'm going to pass the mic around to them so they can introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with our first presentation.
So hi everybody, my name is Rachel Goldwasser. I live here in Concord. I'm the General Counsel and Vice President for Regulatory at a company called Key Capture Energy. We build and operate utility scale battery storage storage projects, and we're not a utility. We don't have any projects in New Hampshire right now, but I hope someday maybe we will, since that's where my heart is. And I was an energy lawyer and advocate in New Hampshire for a long time before I joined Key Capture, so I'm just happy to be here and see lots of familiar faces.
Hello everybody, Brian Callanan. I'm Vice President of Power Resources and Access at the New Hampshire Electric Cooperative. It's a member-owned cooperative serving 118 communities throughout New Hampshire, from Raymond all the way up to Colebrook.
Hello, my name is Alex Tang. I'm a Senior Project Manager at TRC, part of the Advanced Energy Group. Some of the projects that I've been involved in include utility scale energy storage systems on Eversource's service territory, as well as upstate New York. And some of the responsibilities my team take on include feasibility studies all the way through into project implementation.
Hi everyone, I'm Heather Tebbets with Liberty Utilities. I'm the Manager of Rates and Regulatory Affairs, and a lot of what my job does is working with the Public Utilities Commission and now the DOE, and also capital projects like I'll be talking about today, our battery storage pilot.
All right, Alex is going to take us as our first presenter so he can stay, and thank you so much.
All right, thanks for sticking around, everybody. I know we're the last set of panels for a day, so I appreciate taking the time and listening to me talk about a brief overview of energy storage, because I understand that there are certain states that are a little more advanced in terms of implementation of energy storage. So I'd like to just do a broad overview in terms of why energy storage, what does it do, some of the issues along with it, and share some of the interesting projects that are going on in TRC. So as mentioned, there's going to be 4 key topics I'll be going over in this presentation. One is, how does energy storage play into the current energy markets? 2, what are some of the barriers of entry relating to energy storage adaptions? 3, how do we actually do an energy storage project? And 4, some of the case studies that are currently bouncing around TRC. So as everybody has heard over the course of today from our keynote and other panels, I've kind of summarized the current energy market into 3 major factors, or 3 major issues that we're seeing. Resiliency, which covers severe weather events like hurricanes, forest fires in our west coast, tropical storms, to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is actually becoming an increasingly noted issue for the US distribution system. There's been a case in the LA Department of Water in 2018 where cybersecurity faults were identified within their distribution system, and is really taking a hold in the US distribution and thought of integrating new technology into distribution and transmission. Second part is an aging infrastructure. A lot of the distribution system and transmission system in the US were installed pre-1970s. So how electricity is being used now weren't exactly thought out 50 years ago. So how do we address issues like that? And the other factor is increased DER integration. So as many of you know, solar and wind are considered non-dispatchable generation sources, meaning they come when wind's available, they come when the sun's out. And that introduces voltage and frequency fluctuations to an existing system that's used to dispatchable generation. So the interesting thing of how energy storage plays into these 3 factors, it's now an asset that both takes electricity or energy and capable of dispatching it. So how that kind of plays into the 3 factors is, on a resiliency sense, by having energy storage available as a resource, it introduced the ability of creating renewable sourced microgrids, which kind of helps with the resiliency if a case of a circuit being disrupted. A local microgrid could potentially take over that's sourced from solar, wind, or other renewable sources that aren't dependent on fuel transportation, as well as NERC requirements for a lot of new technology being integrated into utility scale. Relating to aging infrastructure, energy storage plays a big role in what's called Nonwires Alternative, which assists with deferral investments to major upgrades associated with utility companies, as well as the capability for peak shifting, which is one of the key value propositions for energy storage, which kind of takes a lot of the peak loads, transfer it elsewhere during the time. For DER integration, it converts a lot of renewable energy into a dispatchable source, meaning you can now control and smooth out those fluctuations that we're seeing when the sun comes out and the wind stops blowing. So with energy storage as a solution to a lot of the problems, what are some of the barriers? The most notable one is, of course, cost. Everyone knows that the integration of energy storage, right now we're just waiting for prices to come down. And there's also a number of business models that's currently being figured out. When should we use energy storage? When do we maximize that profit and value proposition? There's also the engineering aspect. Energy storage introduces what's called a low inertia power system. It's not your traditional fossil fuel generation where if you need energy, it spins faster. It's limited by the inverter in terms of how much capacity it can deliver and how much capacity it can take. And that's something that traditional protection and control in the utility sense is not used to. There's also multiple technologies out there, from flow batteries, hydrogen storage, thermal, to battery energy storage as well. Which one do we use? And on safety sense, I'm sure many of you have heard news about lithium-ion battery fires. One's occurred in Arizona, another one recently in Australia. How do you address safety concerns associated with installing these new technologies? So knowing those barriers, the industries are addressing them, both from a political sense, from incentives, state level mostly, and hopefully in the near future on a federal level, to bring down cost of the initial investment towards energy storage, getting more demonstrations out there. So that technology itself over time through experience can drive down costs, as well as the standardization of feasibility studies, where you're no longer bounded to, we know from an engineering standpoint, a battery 4 hours for a lithium ion system is relatively standard, but a feasibility study can deliver your necessarily use case at a lower mean, so your upfront capital is actually lower. And there's also standardizations of energy storage systems that are occurring in the engineering side of things, such as real-time digital simulation, dynamic system studies, all the way to how energy storage systems are put together and packaged as a whole. On the safety side, there is a typo on the slide. NFPA 855 and UL 9540A are standards that's being adopted for standalone energy storage systems in order to provide as much information to authorities having jurisdiction on some of the safety concerns associated with installing these in their backyards. So with all the things that are happening in the energy storage world, how do we implement one of these? So the general process that I've kind of detailed here are what we typically see at TRC. There's two major perspectives. One's a utility-owned energy storage system. The other one's a developer-owned utility or owned energy storage system. The general flow of things is there's three stages. There's a planning feasibility stage where it's determined the approximate size, the value proposition, what this energy storage needs to do, where does it go, to project specification, conceptual design, where the nooks and crannies of the energy storage system gets figured out, as well as all the associated permitting that needs to occur to make sure that these devices and equipment are sited where they can and best suited for, and ultimately project construction. The two key perspectives that are shown here mainly demonstrate or mainly differentiate themselves in the first two stages. Utility companies spend a lot more time trying to figure out the petition to their local public utility agencies, as well as a need case for these energy storage systems, while developers will focus more on the value proposition, the need case of how to economically benefit from the installation of an energy storage system. And the developers typically bring on energy storage vendors earlier than energy storage or than utility, for example, just due to the processes and internal, I guess, vetting of these technologies. So moving to a couple of interesting case studies that are done in TRC. So Consumers Energy is a public utility company in Michigan. And this one fits under the feasibility stage, where we've been engaged to analyze a microgrid application for an energy storage system, strictly using that as the primary power generation within that microgrid. With, as mentioned, energy storage being a low inertia system, what kind of upgrades is necessary within that circuit in order to have the microgrid function correctly? So what we found is a lot of traditional protections associated with reclosers are no longer sufficient to protect parts of the circuit within the microgrid if we're using energy storage as a primary power source. We actually have to start looking at different trends associated with sections of the circuit in order to identify whether something has happened within the circuit, like a fault or a disruption, where traditionally a recloser would simply see a spike in current and a drop in voltage, then they'll open. Another example is the energy storage project for Eversource at the end of the Cape in P-Town. So TRC is involved pretty much from the start of this project. But the key point that I want to highlight is this second piece of the progress, which is project specification and conceptual design. So TRC was involved shortly after feasibility was done and assisted in developing the energy storage technical specification. So we actually worked with both the feasibility study, Eversource, and their engineering teams to develop an RFP that specifically details the technical requirements on the energy storage system. And this project is actually still ongoing. We're looking at it being commissioned by the end of the year. So it's an exciting development both for Eversource as well as TRC. And lastly, the NIPA North Country Energy Storage System. TRC is involved in an EPC, which is strictly the construction piece of that three-section process of installing an energy storage system. This is a 20 megawatt hour system located in upstate New York, and TRC is involved as engineer record, as well as testing commissioning for this energy storage project. The key challenge is integrating the energy storage system into an existing utility control system and trying to make sure that the energy storage system is dispatched in appropriate times, as well as charging in appropriate times, while in communication with a broader utility energy or utility control system, and making sure that everything works as intended. So hopefully my presentation was able to provide a broad overview in terms of energy storage as a whole, and provide some guidance in terms of the benefit and challenges that we're currently seeing. And I'm open to questions. Right now we're seeing somewhere, this is off the top of my head, 200 to 400 per kilowatt hour. And it depends on location, depends on currently sourcing is a big question, just due to limitations to current supply chain and materials. So, but that's generally industry standard. Mm-hmm. It's contingent on the utility themselves. There is established procedures in utility companies in order to meet NERC civic requirements. And I do know there are continuous upgrade projects associated in Eversource's service territory, National Grid's, to address any potential troubled areas. So there is a progression on upgrading the current grid, but in terms of new projects being implemented, they absolutely have to meet NERC CIP requirements. So when energy storage project gets introduced, pretty much that system gets moved up if it hasn't already to meet cybersecurity requirements. I actually am not sure. I do know utilities themselves each have their own specific requirements. I'm not sure whether it's a federal level. Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you, Alex. And I'm just going to switch slide decks here very quickly, and we will bring Rachel up.
Hey, everybody. This is like a new experience for me, taking a mask off at a podium. Thanks for having me here. So I'm Rachel. I work for a company called Key Capture Energy. We were founded in 2016. We have headquarters in Albany, and we have offices in Houston and Salt Lake City. I am the company's sole New Hampshire employee, and proud of it. I'm still trying to build the New Hampshire office out. Watch me. It's going to happen. We have about 46 employees and 54 megawatts of projects online in battery. Right now we only do basically really big battery projects. So we have 54 megawatts online in New York and Texas. We have about 200 megawatts under construction right now in Texas. One 100 megawatt project and two 50 megawatt projects. We have a bunch of projects in development all over the country. That picture you're looking at is a picture of our New York 1 project. It's our first project. It's a 20 megawatt project. And you can tell by looking at it, basically it depends on the supplier, as Alex said, but sort of just really looks like a bunch of storage containers all next to each other. It's basically it. So that project is, give or take, like Antrim wind sized from a capacity perspective. What are the benefits? And Alex talked about this. I don't have to get too deep into it, and you all probably know already. We hope that our projects will reduce additional infrastructure needs. We try to look at the grid and put projects in places where it'll be beneficial economically, but also physically. We reduce demand with our projects, so if we're operating economically, we're discharging when the grid is at peak. And we try to provide a win for ratepayers by reducing overall electricity bills. What we see happening across the country is a reduction in the number of gas additions on the system to provide electricity on the grid, and an increase in wind and solar. And this is something you probably all know sort of just by following changes as we see in our nationwide grid. And this isn't a New Hampshire phenomenon specifically. It's one that's certainly ISO New England oriented. And what we think as a company is that as you get more renewables on the system, more intermittent generation on the system, batteries are going to play an increasingly important role to be able to accommodate those facilities. This slide has too many words on it for how far away you are from the screen, and I'm not going to read it to you, but I'll give you the high level. The amount of batteries on the grid, as you can tell by the chart, are growing exponentially. Costs have come down about 600%, almost 700% between 2010 and 2020. To a large degree, that's at least to some degree due to our nation's investment in EVs. As EV investments cause battery prices to come down, we see those reductions also in residential, commercial and industrial, and utility scale battery storage. The technology is getting better. The engagement in renewable energy is resulting in batteries being more economic. And we're seeing an increase in federal support. The bill that Congress is debating right now includes an investment tax credit for batteries, standalone batteries, which will change some of the fundamental economics for battery systems. And FERC has been moving really quickly to try to move batteries onto the grid as well. One interesting move that we're seeing from the state perspective, and I know some of you are state policymakers, is states are really moving to engage in battery storage one way or another. What this chart shows is in the blue states are renewable portfolio standards. You all are familiar with those. We have one here in New Hampshire. The orange states are states that have engaged in some sort of storage-related legislation. Many of them are storage targets. Some of them are binding. Some of them are non-binding, but they're meant to be a message to the industry: come invest here. We want your technology in our state. Or to the utilities, so you can send a message to Heather telling her we want Liberty to invest in more battery storage in our state. And there's a bunch of different models for that legislation, but to a large extent, states seem to be starting with a target and saying, like, let's set a target of doing this, X, Y, and Z, and let's work with the policymakers to figure out the right way to get there. There's a bunch of different options that you can consider. So why do states matter? So I just talked about, setting a target and aiming towards it. What else matters? So one thing that's really important is making sure that the rates and the regulations are fundamentally appropriate for batteries. And New Hampshire started down this path with a docket that's open at the commission. But for example, a lot of utilities have something called a demand charge that's been designed for commercial and industrial customers. And so if one of our batteries, like a 10 megawatt battery that we have operating in Texas, if that battery were operating in some jurisdictions in New England, we would have something called a demand charge, which would charge a great deal of money for the battery to charge whether or not that battery was charging in the middle of the night when you want it to be charging, or charging in the middle of the day when you really don't want it to be charging. It's not economic incentive to the behavior that you want to see. So that's, at least for distribution interconnected projects, that's a policy issue that states can really approach and think about. Grid access is, and something we were talking about before the panel. Interconnection is a really big challenge for batteries. We have old rules that aren't really accommodating for new technologies. So thinking about how to think about peak charging and peak discharging in the context of what the grid can accommodate, and whether we're also going to think about what's economic at the same time, is important. So right now in a lot of jurisdictions, when you're studying whether a battery can be interconnected, you're expecting the worst. So you're expecting that it's going to charge at peak and discharge at peak in a way that will be really detrimental to the grid. And then you're going to go to your battery developer and say, okay, well, you've got to pay, $1 gazillion to upgrade the grid because the grid can't accommodate the battery. So it makes sense theoretically, but in practice, it's a disincentive to an investment that hopefully be beneficial. And I think a lot of people are talking about that issue and trying to work on it, both with utilities at the distribution scale, but also with ISO New England at the wholesale market scale in New Hampshire, in this region. Finally, encouraging private investment. I talked a little bit about setting a goal. There are other policies that New Hampshire might want to consider. Some are probably more appropriate for New Hampshire sort of environment than others. I think really stepping back and thinking about how to encourage competition, making sure that there's risk on the developer and not on the ratepayers, and moving that risk as much as you can, and encouraging that the utilities do as much RFP work and as much bringing in as many different players as possible to think about how to solve a problem before trying to solve it, are the kinds of things that could work in a place like New Hampshire, a place that I truly love. And that's it. I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah. Yeah, sure. It's not fully operating yet. Clean Peak Standard is a new model for regulation that folks are still really working through. It effectively seeks to incentivize technologies like battery storage to charge at certain times and to discharge at certain times, and provides a window for discharging in the hope that that will help reduce greenhouse gases over the long term and provide grid support in the way you want. I think theoretically, it's a really good idea. In practice, it can be really challenging to implement. Virginia is also talking about one right now. So there's a number of different states that are doing it. I'm not deeply involved in Massachusetts. I've been sort of tangentially, I've been in a lot of meetings about it, but it's been pretty tangentially involved. I think it's a model. My guess is it's coming, but it's being developed slowly by a few states ahead. I'm looking at everybody else to make sure you guys agree with me here, but I think it's coming. It's harder than it sounds. Like RPS probably seemed in, I don't know if anyone here was around in 2007, 2006, 2005 when we started talking about RPS in New Hampshire. Where's Jeb Bradley when you need him? But that seemed really crazy back in the day when we were developing an RPS. So I really think we're getting closer on something like a Clean Peak that could really make a lot of sense in a lot of places. Give it a couple years, and I bet you it's going to take off in a bunch of places. Sure. Yeah, of course. Far be it from me to make recommendations to the New Hampshire legislature. So, I got to think about that. I think that the target idea is one I would certainly start with, and I would work with folks like Heather, honestly, to think about what makes sense and what works. I think, and Brian, I'm only leaving you out because you guys aren't regulated, right? I think there are some best practices for non-wires alternatives that would be great to implement, but I think that those are probably best implemented at the regulatory level, right? Maybe not at the legislative level. So those are things like thinking about third-party managers for non-wires alternatives. Heather's going to start throwing things at me now, so I'm just going to thinking about making sure that that there's competition for non-wires alternative solutions, and so the lowest cost, best outcome solution can be applied. Thinking about if you only need a non-wires solution in the summer, pairing it with a competitive solution so that battery can be deployed in the market the rest of the year. There's a bunch of those kinds of things that can make batteries more economic and a more economic solution to a traditional wires problem. I think those are probably the places to start. I think a Clean Peak standard, honestly, is a place to go in a few years. That would be my advice for New Hampshire. If the folks in the legislature are really committed to bringing batteries, doing some targeted keystone projects could be another thing to think about. So for example, in Maryland, the commission there is doing, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think between 4 and 6 different non-wires solutions pilot projects that have different ownership models and different operational models. So that could be something to look at and something to sort of practice with. The key from my perspective is that, and I didn't really talk about this in this presentation, but the pictures that you're looking at are some of our first projects that we built in Texas. They're 9.9 megawatt projects. And the Texas wholesale market operator, ERCOT, who worked really hard on getting ready for batteries to be interconnected. And the utilities had worked really hard at getting batteries ready to be interconnected. And then we went to interconnect them, and we found out batteries are hard. Like, we don't have other technologies right now that charge and discharge. And so it's really important to get started and to figure out what's hard and to solve those problems before you need a lot of batteries on the system. At least in places that are maybe not as, utility industry is not known for being like super nimble, right? I mean, I work for a 46-person company and we're not even super nimble, and so there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of regulations, and so figuring out where there's problems is another place to start. So maybe some thoughts around pilots and practice. And that's where I think the target idea is a good one.
So currently in other states, there's also pilot programs that are going on that are all public information. So New York State, for example, through NYSERDA, they've done multiple demonstration projects associated with energy storage. And there are feasibilities results, measured results that they do publish at the end. I can't pinpoint you to which exact, they're called ponds, that would contribute, but NYSERDA does have a lot of information there, California Energy Council as well. And also with the projects that are coming into fruition in the state of Massachusetts, in Connecticut, there are demonstration projects out there where after a year or two, the information should be publicly available to kind of justify investments or justify next steps for New Hampshire as well.
Yeah, I'll note we're really engaged in New York, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening there. We recently built a 3 megawatt, so a much smaller project for a New York utility for Con Edison, Orange and Rockland, and transferred that ownership to them, and they're operating it now. They're telling us how to operate it now. And so there is a lot of that data. The thing that I think is interesting about that Maryland docket, that it just opened maybe a year ago. I don't know, time has no meaning anymore. I think they just awarded the projects a year ago or so, is that they had a bunch of different models for how to do those pilots. So it wasn't just like, we're gonna do a pilot, here's an example, but they used a bunch of different use cases, a bunch of different ownership models, and then they're gonna report back and tell us all how it went. And I can get Kelly the docket for that. Okay, anything else? It's like really new skills here. Okay.
All right, we'll switch slides again here. Thank you, Rachel. That was great. And I will bring Brian up next.
Hello, everybody. I thought what I could do for this group is walk through a storage project that's up in Moultonborough and give you some of the lessons we've learned, what the project is, and how it's operating. So I've got some, I think, some kind of neat pictures that we can walk through. I'll give you a quick project overview of how the project came about. And I want to focus on the agreement that we use to make this project happen. There's a lot, I mean, the whole panel would say there's a lot of different options that you can use to get a battery built. And we chose this one, and I want to walk through why. Operations of how, give you some pictures of how it looks when it's operating, and then some lessons learned. And then I'm really not supposed to be the one talking about this. There's this guy in a picture there, Mr. Gary LeMay, which hopefully everybody has seen at this conference before. And then there's another guy there too, Congressman Pappas. Okay, quick overview. So this project, it's a 2.45 megawatt battery, 2-hour. So, energy storage is unique and extremely flexible. So you have to learn new terms. It's not just about the capacity anymore, it's how long that capacity can run. So when you say megawatt, that's the size of the battery. And then the overall energy storage amount is how long it can run for. So this battery can run for 2 hours straight at roughly 2.5 megawatts. It's located at our 2 megawatt Moultonborough solar array, but it's really operated completely independently. It just happened to be a darn good location to put it. And that's really about it. And it really makes a nice picture. The battery footprint is very small, and having put gas turbines together before, it is pretty amazing to see the capability of a storage unit like this, or a energy storage unit like this, and how small it is. It's very energy dense and capable. And in this one, it's less than 500 square feet. We do not control this. It's controlled remotely by ENGIE North America in California. That's a nice picture of it. It looks like some little scaling issue going on there, but there's a lot on this slide. I just wanted to give you an idea of how long it took to put it together. And this is from the beginning of the concept, which was in 2018, to when we actually got it started. And it kind of conveniently broke itself into 3 different years. It took us a year just to figure out what we were doing. That took a long time. And then once we figured out what we were doing and who we wanted to work with, it took another year just to figure out what that contract looked like. So 2 years of paper pushing, and then you get a battery going in 1 year. So it ended up working out pretty well, but the 3-year term that you're looking at, 2 years of it was a lot of talking, and 1 year was actually getting something ordered and delivered and put on a site. So battery storage, in my view, is just amazingly fast. This project demonstrates that in comparison to, like, say, a gas turbine. Okay, energy storage services agreement. What does that mean? Another acronym to add to the mix, ESSA. This particular contract, I'm told, is a little bit unique, and that's why I wanted to walk through it with everybody. I'm using a term here that was told to me, not one that we came up with. They were told to us that this is a battery that is demonstrating a between, and I use quotes, between the meter storage energy services, storage services agreement. And I'll tell you what that means. What is between is something that is in front of the meter and something that is behind the meter. So it's in the middle of that. And a behind the meter resource is a load reducing resource. So the way it impacts the distribution system is it reduces the amount of energy that you need to get to that delivery point. It'll turn itself on, help serve the local load, and never actually go beyond the meter. So it's behind the meter. Something that's in front of the meter is just the opposite. It would be participating in wholesale markets, and it has to be visible at all times to the wholesale market so they know what's going on with it. This particular project is participating in both of those areas. So it's a behind the meter load reducer for the New Hampshire Electric Cooperative. So it helps reduce our loads. And yet it participates in the regulation markets for the wholesale ISO New England market. It's considered between the meter because it's doing both. And that last bullet is really why we went that way. I can go back to some experience with some gas turbines. One way to think about those, they call them fast start turbines. They are there for when things get rough. And they're there to turn on only when things get rough, but they can turn on very quickly. I don't know much of anything that turns on as quick as a battery. It's very quick. Seconds, less than a second, actually. It's kind of sad and not a good use of investment dollars to have a battery sit there that is so capable and only be turned on 100 times a year. There's 8,760 hours in a year. Why not use the rest of them? Because that battery can do a lot of things. And in New England, they want a way to balance out the supply and demand because there's power plants are always trying to chase the right demand value. Why not have a battery that is extremely flexible to help you with that service? So this battery participates in the regulation market. It's a special name. It's called Alternative Technology Regulation Resource, or ATRR. So it's being used a lot, which is okay. We're not going to wear it out. It's meant to do that. For the co-op, we use it to schedule roughly 70 dispatches a year, not a lot. It's going to run for a couple hours, 140 hours a year. That's less than 2%. The rest of it can be participating in the wholesale markets, helping provide services for the whole region. And what we did is we set this up so the alignment was good for both parties. We've got New Hampshire Electric Co-op, that's us. ENGIE is the company that built the battery, manages the battery, operates the battery. We just pay them for a fee in order to dispatch it once in a while. And we set it up so that we will share in any additional revenue that they can find from participation in the wholesale markets. So if we want them to chase the best value for this resource, and we will share in those benefits. So because that service is set up that way, we are creating the most value for the resource for our members, for ENGIE, which is a company that put the thing together, and then also for ISO New England, because we're providing valuable services to them. There's a lot more details I could go in on that one, but in a nutshell, that's how that works. So what does that look like? Here's a picture. Yep, here's a picture of a regular dispatch. It's a little easier to explain. On the left-hand axis, that is load in kilowatts. At the bottom, at the horizontal axis, that's time of the day. And then you'll see two things here. There's a little line, which is gray, and that's referencing the right-hand axis, vertical axis, which is state of charge, which is a new term. It just says how full is the battery. 100% means full, 0 means empty. The green represents whether it's discharging or charging. So in this instance, we called the battery to dispatch because we thought it would be a good time to do that. And it started dispatching, or it started charging itself up because it wasn't full a couple hours before we needed it to discharge. It then rapidly discharged, and you can see that through the little gray line. So the little gray line gets really close to 100. And then when it starts discharging, which is above the 0 line, that's dispatching into the system, you can see that that state of charge line goes down. Okay. I could have picked a better example, actually, but now that I'm looking at it. But this is the simple one. Okay. This one's not so simple. This is what it looks like when it's on regulation. Regulation services are those services where you're trying to meet supply and demand all the time, and it's actually done on a 4-second interval. This view here is not on a 4-second interval. I believe it's on a 15-minute, or it might be a 5-minute interval. So in here, in each of these lines, you would see the accumulation of whatever that battery did. I'm sorry, in the area graph, the green. But you can see what's interesting about this is the battery likes to be at roughly 40% state of charge here. And when it's there, it can go ahead and participate in discharging or injecting services into the grid so that to try to match that demand, and then pulling energy from the grid and not have to be worried that it's too full to do that or too empty to do that. So it kind of stays right in the middle, and it goes up and down all day long. And I can assure you there's nobody sitting at a desk doing that. The ISO is communicating directly with the battery to move it up and down. So that's what that site is looking like up in Moultonborough right now. It is rarely doing this. It is doing this all the time. Lessons learned. I didn't want to bore you with like 20 slides here, so I only did one because we learned a lot in this project. But the first thing is, we're utility folks, and we like to make sure that we have backups of things. And transformers are expensive. This one came from, this unit came from China, and it uses a different voltage. So we needed to find a transformer, which wasn't as easy as we wanted to make it, or as we liked. But we were able to do that. We were actually able to provide that service for Anji because we could find it better than they could. It's a 550 delta for anybody that's technical, but I have no idea on the low side. The other thing that was interesting here is it's really not a push button operation, or not as much as we thought it was. So when we say 2.45 megawatts and that can run for 2 hours straight, that's what we thought we were going to be able to do. Push an on button, and it's going to dispatch 2.45 hours, or 2.45 megawatts for 2 hours straight, no questions asked. It hasn't done that once since we've had it. So it's doing its best. It's coordinating 594 batteries that all have their own control systems, 22 different control systems, in order to make sure all those little batteries are building up into one big battery. I don't know if this is the same for every battery that's out there, but it's the one we have, or it's the one we're using. So what we have been finding is that when we go ahead and dispatch it, it will actually overachieve and produce a little bit more than we were asking for. And then in the second hour, it won't be able to keep that rate up, so it'll produce a little bit less. And it's really through the ignorance of us not understanding how these things work, and that's why we do these projects, right, is to learn. But when we talk about not giving us exactly 2.45 megawatts, it's giving us 2.55 megawatts. It's not a big difference, but it's not the same level. And we do this for peak shaving, and that's on an hour basis. So some of the math on it is to try to hit that right hour. So we're working on it, and we're working together as a team with Anji to get that to even out. One other thing is we've noticed with this is, and I've got a picture here that gives you an idea of all the batteries that are just shoved into this shipping container. That's really all that it is. It's just a bunch of batteries with some control systems in there to keep things. Okay, sorry. To me, that's all it looks like. Is that because it's grouped together, you can have a small failure in one area and still get quite a bit of performance from this. That's very different from a traditional generator. If there's a element of that generation supply system, a traditional generator supply system that's broken, it's very often you don't get anything out of it. Sometimes you can get partial, it might be a pressure problem or something, you can get partial. In the battery, it's really fantastic because we did have some issues, but we are still able to dispatch it, maybe not at the full amount, but we can still dispatch it. So that's been pretty impressive. It's been a great project. We've learned a lot, and it's doing a lot for the members. And that, I believe, is all I have for you. If there's any questions, I can take them. We didn't build it. I don't know how much it costs. So someone else put it together, and we talk about shifting risks around. So the other supplier is the one that put that together. We did agree on a monthly price to pay for them for a certain amount of time. And it benefits all of our members. It helps us reduce some of our demand costs, just like a commercial account. A utility has demand costs that are very similarly charged. So it helps everybody. We're about at a 180 megawatt facility, or 180 megawatt peak utility, which might sound like a lot, but it's not. And this is only 2.5 megawatts, so it's less than 2%. Hi. So this one is providing some frequency regulation services through that regulation market. We are looking at it to provide whatever value we can find for our members. So I can't tell you that we are trying to do something like a microgrid somewhere, or we are trying to solve expansion of a feeder in one area. and we're using the battery to help with that, that's not something we're looking at right now. Hi there. Yep. It's a lot. Well, it's a lot for us. And the easy answer is we would build out to our lowest loads. That would be the about max that you would be interested in doing until you started to add in additional services. Like I think what was coming up with the other question earlier is you can use batteries to help with your distribution system in different ways. Any other questions? Thanks very much.
All right, last slide deck, everyone, and last speaker. We have Heather coming up from another utility in New Hampshire, Liberty.
Awesome. Well, you guys are still here. I'm the last speaker of the day, so I'm happy you're all still here. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Liberty. We have a battery storage pilot that we got approval for from the Public Utilities Commission back in 2019. And it was pretty exciting for us. It's our first storage project across the country. So just a little bit of background about Liberty. We serve natural gas here in New Hampshire. We're the largest gas utility, and we're the smallest electric utility in New Hampshire. But we also serve 23 other states in the country, including California, Missouri, Georgia, Texas, Arizona, Massachusetts, New York, for gas, water, and electric. But as I mentioned, this is our first opportunity for storage. And the idea behind this storage project really was to engage customers and also do a pilot to talk really about and understand further what do our customers want? What can we do as a utility? You heard Brian talk a little bit about, hey, we don't know what we're doing here and we're going to try something. That's what we're trying to do here as well. And we were lucky enough to get an opportunity to work with a lot of different groups. In fact, Clean Energy New Hampshire, I think, was one of them that we had worked with too, to get the Public Utilities Commission to work this with us and figure out a way to learn more information about what customers want and can we actually do a battery storage pilot with our customers. So what is it all about? So what we have here is we've deployed batteries in customer homes with time of use rates. And why would we do that? Well, one of the things that's really important when you have storage behind the meter, and Brian talked a little bit about behind the meter, and in this case, behind the meter really just means that it's actually in the customer's home. So this is for residential customers. And what does this all mean? Why do we want time of use rates? I think you heard a little bit earlier too about community aggregation and the whole opportunity to shift and reduce costs on the grid if we actually can shift what we're doing at certain times of the day. So the program was designed to incorporate storage with time use rates, whereby the customers would actually have their batteries dispatching to the grid at the highest period of rates during the day. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute in the next slide. We also looked at reducing demand. So it was mentioned that the co-op is 180 megawatts. We're about 200 megawatts at our peak. Again, really small. We're the smallest electric utility in New Hampshire with regards to customer size. And so what we wanted to do is see, can we reduce that hourly peak at ISO New England? And maybe you're asking, why does it matter? Well, every month we get a bill for that usage, that megawatt usage, from two locations. We get one from National Grid, they're our transmission provider, and we also get another one from ISO New England, and it's based on that usage at that peak hour every single month. And then we have that annual peak that we're always trying to reduce so that we can save money on the grid. So the idea behind this project really was, can we actually reduce our peak load at that peak hour each month and that annual peak by deploying battery storage and engaging customers to do it as well. The other piece of this is also having the opportunity to reduce distribution usage. And I say that because these batteries are deploying to customer homes every single day. And we'll talk about the time of use rates and why that's a benefit to customers and to the grid, and actually all of our customers, not just the customers who have batteries. The other benefit, of course, is battery backup during power outages. New Hampshire is no stranger to tropical storms, major snowstorms, ice storms, windstorms, and our customers are no stranger to that as well. So with having batteries in your home, you have the opportunity to avoid a power outage that could be prolonged. And if you have solar, that actually, with these batteries, you could go pretty long with the batteries charging up, those being charged by that solar, and then just continuing through that outage. A little bit on here I put here is it was a pretty big deal, as I mentioned, for us to get this approved because it's the first in the state. And it's actually one of the first in the country to pair it with these special time of use rates, which I believe Clifton Below talked about earlier briefly, that these rates were created through the docket with his help to really look at the cost causation and how do we create rates that really address those costs in those highest priced hours. So installation's pretty simple. This is an example. You'd have, we chose Tesla for the Powerwall, and the reason for that was it had the highest capacity for kW, for kilowatts, and it also had the highest energy at the time. We looked at different battery makers. Tesla has 5 kW per battery and 13.5 kilowatt hours. So kind of what Brian talked about here. We have a total of 1 megawatt right now, and then we have we can dispatch probably about for 2 hours or so at that max. So that's really the benefit, and that's what we're trying to capture, is that 1 hour to peak shave on the system. You have a Tesla battery. If you happen to have solar at your house, you have a solar inverter. But essentially, you also have this gateway, and it's a box. It kind of looks like just a big metal box on the wall, and you'll see it in a minute. I have a video from one of our customers who was nice enough to talk about his experience with the install and how the battery is working. So it's a very simple installation. Every customer gets 2 power walls. You ask why. Tesla's purpose is they really want all home backup. It's for those of people who have well pumps and maybe central air, you really need more than 5 kW to get those machines running. And if you have a few things running at once, then you're going to end up not being able to utilize the batteries during those high price periods for the time of use rates. So it was really important to have 2 batteries. So time of use rates. This is kind of new for us as well in New Hampshire, where we do have our rate D10, which is basically your distribution piece of your rate is time of use. You have an on-peak and off-peak, but none of the other pieces of your rates are broken down by time. So the way our periods work is Monday through Friday, we have the critical peak, mid-peak, and off-peak. So to give you an example, critical peak is between 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. And mid-peak starts at 8 a.m. in the morning and goes to 3 p.m. And then off-peak is that overnight period from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Again, we have weekends and holidays. The difference is there's no critical peak. So you have an 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. off-peak, and then you're going to have 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on-peak. And they're the same rates as what you would see during the week. What's interesting about the rates, I will say, is that those critical peak rates are at least 3 times that off-peak rate, and could even be a little more, depending on the time of year. And the reason for that is the idea behind this program was to really show those costs. We didn't create rates kind of just a guessing game of what we thought those costs would be. There's actual data behind the model calculation for those periods, that actual hour at ISO New England, as to when those peaks happened every month and every year for the past 10 years, 12 years or so. So what we do is that model will then take that data and it will allocate all the costs for energy service, transmission, and distribution to those hours. So what you end up with is these cost-based rates that says this is why your transmission rate is going to be 12 cents in your critical peak hour in the summertime, because that is when, between 3 and 8 p.m. in the summer is when you're using the most power. What's interesting about this also is it's only based on a residential class. So our residential class actually peaks in the winter. And why is that? We don't have a lot of air conditioning load, but we have a lot of heating load. And lights, etc. So our residential customers actually peak in the winter. And because of that, you look at the rate structure, and I don't have it up here, but the seasonality of it really shows how customers, when you look at the breakdown of transmission, distribution, and energy service, the energy service rate is expensive in the winter when you break it down for the costs. And why is that? Because our power plants that are using natural gas to make power are competing with the electricity use, right? So, with the gas use for heating. So, with all of that happening, we have higher winter rates for energy service, lower summer rates for energy service, and transmission's kind of balanced throughout the year, and as is distribution. So, some of the longevity and considerations of storage is really how we're looking at this. So for longevity, batteries degrade, right? So all of you have a cell phone. I've seen many of you on it today, which is great. And after time, you say, gosh, I charged this thing up. I swear I charged it. Why is it dying on me? Batteries degrade. So because they degrade, that's a consideration when you're installing these batteries to determine how long you want a program to go on. At what point are you either going to reinvest in the program, meaning you're going to replace those batteries, or you're going to end that program? These are all kinds of considerations when you're looking at the flexibility of any kind of storage project. So for this storage project, because they're in customer homes and they're cycling every day, then the customer has the ability to use that power to offset their load every single day between 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. So the longevity is there, so 10 years or so, and could even go longer depending on your use. So a little bit of information too, when we're talking about the batteries, it's kind of like using the Nest. If any of you have the Nest at home, the batteries learn your behavior. So if you're a low energy user, your batteries will last longer simply because they're not cycling as much, and then their state of charge also is going to be a lot higher most of the time. So they're not cycling up and down as much as necessary, right? It's not at a high rate of charge and then comes right down and then up a rate of charge every day. So it's a benefit to you as a user of the batteries that your batteries will actually last longer. When we talk about sizing, I just talked about how, we have customers who are residential customers as part of this program, but sizing also has to be considered long-term for commercial and grid backup, which, we've heard a few stories here today about grid backup, or utilizing the grid for different purposes like ancillary services. And these are all long-term considerations. And, our program really is for us to learn, how do batteries operate? How can customers interact with them? And also, if they're going to interact with them, how are we going to give them the benefits on there? So when we talk about sizing, we really have to look at, what are we trying to serve? What is the purpose? The one thing I also talked about, how often the batteries are dispatched does affect the lifespan of them. So the more often that they're dispatched, if they're only dispatched for, down a third of the way, they're still going to last longer than if you cycle them 100% every single day. So again, considerations when we looked at our storage program is, what is our ultimate goal? Our ultimate goal is that peak reduction, and how long we could accomplish that. The other thing I talk about a little bit too is storage and solar. And when you have solar with the storage, you have unlimited power backup, and this is fully automated. So we do have some customers in our program who actually have solar, and so everything's fully automated. And we have a bunch of customers in the program that don't have solar, but again, everything's fully automated in the home. So when they lose power, they don't even know. They'd actually have to look at the app on their phone to say, hey, you're on battery backup. They would never know. A couple other things here when we talk about, someone asked a question about cost. So there's a value stack, and there's two value stacks we look at, because there's one that's the customer. So myself as the customer, I'm saying, okay, I'm going to pay to get some batteries in my house because Liberty's offering a program. And I don't think I covered it, but just so you guys know, the batteries are about $17,000 fully installed for 2 batteries, and the customers pay between about $6,000 for that. So the utility pays the rest, the customers pay a contribution. So I'm saying to myself, I'm going to pay all this money for batteries. What am I getting out of it? Well, you're getting backup power. That's one thing you're definitely getting out of it, right? Is a power outage, you're not going to lose power. If you have rooftop solar, you have that opportunity for self-consumption again, because you can utilize the solar during the day to offset your load, and then those batteries are going to get charged by the solar and then offset your load once the sun goes down in your home. So there could be an opportunity if your load is low enough, you never pull power from the grid. It's absolutely possible. I'm not saying it's likely, but it's possible that you could never pull power from the grid simply if you really manage how you're using your power. And then we talk about utility bill reduction and time use bill management. Again, as I mentioned, we have seen some of our customers actually shift their usage to off peak and use very few kilowatt hours, critical peak and on peak. So their bill, as I mentioned, if their rate's 3 times on critical peak than it would be off peak, their off peak rate's like 6 cents total. Total. Right now, on average, you're paying about 17 cents for Liberty if you're a residential customer. And now you're paying 6 cents. So you just saved a whole bunch of money if all you did was just shift some of your laundry, whatever, off peak, especially on the weekends, right? So that's a huge savings. The other value stack we talk about is what's the benefit for the utility. Because when we look at the utility, there's a benefit to the utility because we have our employees, our customers, and our shareholders. And so what we look at here is what kind of deferrals can we do? We talked a minute about, non-wire solutions, right? So are there deferrals that we could do? Can we avoid building another feeder? Can we avoid having to upgrade a substation if we deploy batteries in certain areas? That's a potential opportunity for us. Load management, right? I just talked about load management. These customers are managing their load, and we're managing their load so that they actually are not taking power from the grid. And we have an opportunity to lessen the stress, especially during, we'll say, hot periods on our grid. Peak shaving, again, another opportunity where I told you we get those 2 massive bills every single month from ISO New England and National Grid. So all those bills are reduced, and those are pass-throughs to our customers. So obviously, our customers have to pay less. And then we talk about resource adequacy. And again, that's another opportunity where it could be backup power during a power outage. So these customers are not having to, lose power during that time. It could even be for other opportunities of ancillary services on the grid. So there's a couple stacks of value that we look at when we're looking at these kinds of projects. And what I'll say is that, it's been a huge benefit to the company to learn about how the batteries operate, how customers feel about it. And for us overall, it's been a really good experience. So I will, what I want to do now.
We're running just up on time.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
I know, the day is flown by.
So sorry.
But you might want to take questions, just a few at
Yes.
the end of the session.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I
And
think I
we'll
talked
post
that
our
long.
slides online so everyone can go
Okay.
and watch the video.
Are there any questions? Okay.
Oh, you've got one.
Oh, I have one. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So a couple things. One, on reliability, my first question to the customer would say, why do you think that? What have you read? What have you heard? Second question is, what is their backup generator using? Is it using propane? Is it using natural gas? Or is it using the gasoline because it's a standby? So those are the kinds of things, right? Because if it's natural gas, the odds are pretty good. They're going to have they have it coming to them. If it's propane, same thing if they have a full tank. If it's a standby, man, they got to go to the gas station, get cans, everything else. So personally, I really think that it's a conversation with the customer to understand their fears and to really understand why they are just so unsure about this technology, because it's not new technology. But it's new in the sense that I think Rachel mentioned the costs have come down so quickly, so great that now customers are like, "What is this?" So I think personally, if it was me, I would be asking those questions to the customer and say, "What are your fears? What are you going to use now? And why are you hesitant?" Oh. Yeah.
Emergency generators, there's a startup time that's necessary for the generator to warm up when an energy storage does not. And there's also the case that mechanical engineers do favor generators because there's been years and years of experience, industry standards around diesel generator and natural gas generator. And on the battery energy storage side, that still feels relatively new, but you can compare it to UPSs in the past or flywheels to kind of bridge that gap, but you're simply extending that period of time instead of a couple minutes to hours now. So that's another argument that you can make.
I wanted to add to that too, is you can stack value with that resource more so than you would be able to with a generator. If you wanted to reduce your electricity costs or demand charges, you can run that battery much more often than you can run that standby.
I guess that the O&M costs would probably also be lower for your battery plus solar than for a industrial grade generator. I wonder if the year-over-year costs might not be a benefit if you add in the behind the meter benefits, depending on what state they're in, et cetera.
It's complicated. That's what I'll tell you. I can tell you right now, for example, is my last conversation with Tesla is, and I don't know about other car makers, but they don't allow for people yet to be able to put the power back on the grid in that simple fashion. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just means today it's not going to happen. It's complicated. You need lots and lots of API systems that can talk to all the other things that are going on in your house. And also, you're going to need that car to be able to do certain things. It's going to have to be charged a certain way. It's not impossible, but it's not today. And there's a lot that has to happen behind the scenes in order to get that to work. But I do think it's going to be possible someday. And I do think there's good opportunity for the utilities to be able to pull that power from customer cars.
So I'm aware, I think the DOE actually had a pilot project specifically looking into that. I believe it's called Spider. So it's been demonstrated that that model works, but the issue is still comes down to ownership of data, because you're now free flowing your charge of EV vehicles, the information of that charge, the state of it, to now an open market. So there's also the ownership of data question that's catching a lot of people's attention because those are private information. So, as Heather's mentioned, not today, but definitely potential in the future. But there's a lot of attention on it.
I wanted to add to that because we are looking at that very closely. I did a little talk on a transactive energy rate, or a TER, which is it's a 24-hour time of use rate basically. But that one of the most compelling DERs is exactly that use case of a car being able to put its energy back on the grid. We've only found one actual charger, bidirectional charger that's UL listed right now. But there's a whole slew of them that are getting ready to get going in 2022 and 2023. So we are actively looking at that.
Well, by the sounds of this conversation, I wish we could stay here and talk all evening about energy storage, but I also assume people are anxious to either get home to their families or to join us for networking and happy hour after this. So I want to say a big thank you to our panel today. Fascinating presentations, and thank you for sharing with us. All right, thanks everyone, and a final thank you to everyone who came today. I'm so excited we got to see you in person and to enjoy your company. So thank you on behalf of Clean Energy New Hampshire for a wonderful 2021 LES conference.